Well, good afternoon. It is great to be back in Christiansand. I think it's about 15 years since I was here. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for staying. I know that I'm in between you and catching a train home. I have 30 minutes, so I'm going to be doing it really quickly, but you'll get the slides, and you'll get the text. So what a week it has been. The week of weeks. Thomas Cook, the epitome of mass travel, collapsed, stranding thousands of people. As Tina said, millions of children were out on strike to tell politicians how to do their job and govern. In my country, the judges in the highest court of the land have just determined that the Prime Minister lied to the Queen. And in the States now, the Democrats are starting an impeachment movement. So it's no time to be shy or to mince words. Now, when you're working as hard as you are with a skill or a discipline, it's often easy to forget that marketing, technology, and even tourism are tools or means to a greater purpose. And this is what a few pundits have observed. Now, I'm going to try, in a fast-paced 30 minutes, remind you of the why and the what that Nikolai there is talking about. It's a huge story, so all I can do is in bold headlines, and I'm really happy that much of what I'm saying completely complements and supports Tina's remarks. But I'll start with another assertion that another technologist made, Gert Leerdhard, when he said, "Business as usual is dead or nearly dead," or it should be. And a radical redesign is needed. And so this is all about the why and the what. Now, unfortunately, in tourism, I don't think we have collectively yet absorbed the fact that business as usual is dead. We seem to be in a collective denial, even though in our hearts we know that some kind of change is necessary. So where are we now? Well, I believe we're, and do many others, that we're right in the middle of these two curves, if you like. It's the biggest tipping point in history. In humanity's history, bigger than the birth of science, bigger than the Industrial Revolution, and this change is taking place at breathless speed. It's a vortex of change. The acronym there, VUCA, meaning it's the most volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous time to be on the planet. So what do we know about the future? Well, there are three things for absolute certain. The first, of course, is it hasn't happened yet. But what is it really? It's the sum total of the visible actions and choices made by people just like us who lived in the past. But underneath those choices, and this is what's key, were an invisible set of assumptions and values that guided those choices. Let's look at what they were thinking of. When I was growing up, this is how people imagined the future that we are now living in. See, the power of imagination? What do you see there? You see boxes, machines, a focus on individual freedom delivered by money and stuff. Now, that's perfectly understandable. They'd just been through 2 major world wars and a lot of privation. They imagined cars, obviously. They even imagined the odd drone, and you would be driving it, because they couldn't imagine what was invisible, and that was the internet, that was Wi-Fi, that was this incredible digital connectivity that would enable us to have driverless drones, if we want them, and we may obviously have to put up with them. So what were the invisible assumptions and beliefs? Here, in this case, we have education. They even imagined tablets, but they were all connected to a machine that you had to sit at. They couldn't imagine you'd be walking around with an encyclopedia in your hand. So what were the invisible images that were guiding all of that? Well, here are 3 images. This is a picture of a hospital corridor. This is a picture of a prison corridor. And this is a picture of a hotel corridor. Does it look familiar? What do you see? You see lines and boxes. For the last 300 years or more, the Western world has conceived the world as a machine that operated according to the laws of physics. These beliefs shaped all aspects of our lives. So when tourism took off after the war, it even shaped how we organized things. And when you read the slides later and can reflect on some of this, you'll see some of the assumptions that underpinned this way of approaching the world. So when mass tourism took off after the Second World War, what did we do? We wanted respectability. We used the obvious manufacturing model that was available at the time. And our language very subtly but systematically changed to look at the different words. Travelers became tourists because we assembled packages that we called products. Even places became products. Our guests became consumers with a price attached to their head, and their precious experiences became transactions. Now, it's fair to say this model has been extremely successful in all aspects of society. This is all of the things that have happened socioeconomically. And unusually, this was a major international study, they actually recognized that international tourism was playing in this as well. And it's true to say, I would argue, that we have right now what I call runaway tourism growth. You're all familiar with the UNWTO chart of growth. The problem is, what they didn't foresee is that chart going vertical. In the last 2 years, tourism has grown at 6 to 7% per annum, twice the rate that they're used to. What that means is, and I don't know if you know this, but it means that in 10 years' time, we will double. So it won't be 1.8 billion, it will be more like 2.6. Are we ready for that? Would you not agree? That's runaway growth. At the same time, as Tina intimated, we have runaway technology. Now, I'm no expert on this subject, but Gerhard is. And if you were to, I would really suggest, Gerd Leonhard, I should say, I'd really suggest you read that book. Because as Tina says, an awful lot of this technology you don't need to worry about. But if you are interested and you want a sense of how rapidly, that is vertical takeoff. It's what's called the singularity. They're fascinated by it. But anyway, it just shows you we have runaway technology. It's also impossible to talk about the future without talking about climate change. And frankly, I'll be honest with you, I'm utterly appalled at our lack of response and planning. I've only got 30 minutes today, so I'm not going to go into the detail. I'll leave that to Greta Thunberg, who's done an amazing job, as Tina said, of raising awareness of this threat. But all her efforts, all that loneliness, all of that persistent processing won't be of any value whatsoever if we don't change our behavior. And let me ask a question. Has your destination or business got a climate mitigation and adaptation strategy? Has it? I doubt that it has. Very few people have done that. But that's what we need to start thinking about. Not thinking about, we need to start doing it. So tourism is vulnerable to a whole set of forces causing this amazing flux of change. But what we've really overlooked, and this is really a challenge, are the systemic flaws built into that operating model that caused us to be so successful so far. These systemic flaws only become apparent when you've reached a certain rate and pace and scale of growth. That's why the term over, for over-tourism, is appropriate, because it has ecological implications and meaning associated with it. As Norwegians, as people involved in the fishing industry, you've all heard of overfishing, when there's no fish left to fish. Well, maybe we'll find, as Tina suggested, there might not be many tourists left who want to come to us when we're so overdeveloped. So I'm going to race through 6 flaws. Forgive me for the racing. I just want you to see the whole picture. We haven't admitted that tourism is actually a derivative secondary economy that is based on demand that's generated by the success of all the other sectors of the economy. Even though you're all marketers, be honest, we don't actually control demand. We can maybe shape it, but we don't actually control it. We can't control it when it comes in, and we can't control it when it goes out, because it's forces we don't have control over. Secondly, we are an extractive economy that is almost, in my opinion, as dangerous, or as not dangerous, but as impactful as open pit mining. Open pit mining, for example, or extraction, they basically have so many controls to go through before they actually can start development. We consume land, landscapes, water, energy, cultures, space, endless amounts of concrete. We generate vast amounts of waste, including greenhouse gases, sewage, and plastic. much of which has to be disposed of by third parties, often in host destinations. Now, when tourism took off in the 50s, as I said, it developed a model that was designed around machines. The manufacture of things that could be controlled by one vertical integration of companies as everyone tried to control the value chain. So that was the model, the industrial model that we have been working with. When in actual fact, the reality is we know that tourism is not an industry. There's nobody in charge. You can't get all the decision makers in one room to make a decision. We're a network. So we sell experiences. We don't sell things. And those experiences depend on assets that we don't own either. So we have no need to get a return on our asset, which we would if we did own it. We own nature. We use nature, I should say. We use the landscape. We don't pay for that in many cases. We often sell it, though, at discounted prices. There are virtually no barriers to entry in tourism. So new entrants coming in, very often they don't need any professional qualifications to open a B&B, to open a little souvenir shop or a tour company. So the first thing that many of them do is they copy someone else who's been successful. And so what often means is that when there's competition, then the easiest thing to do is to try and sell the unit cheaper than someone else. And if you don't think this is a problem, then just have a look at these two reports. It took 70 years for the tourism industry to begin to acknowledge that it incurred costs. And if, by the way, you think I'm being too negative, this is just the beginning. This is to get you angry and aware you have to do something, okay? Sorry for the bad news. Tourism loves positive things, don't they? Think about it. They don't like to hear when things aren't necessarily all clean and green. But look at the orange line here. This is at Euromonitor came out with this last year showing how we've grown tourism since 2000 to 2018 by upwardly. But look at the blue line. That is the cost per transaction that's actually gone down. So no wonder we're having to grow in order to make up for that. So we're hooked on growth. The bad news is we're underperforming, vulnerable, and out of control. That's the net result of being at the tail end of an old model. We now have to collectively imagine a better future. And again, I give credit to Tina. That was a fantastic presentation talking about the various specific ways in which we could start to do that. This is where we're going. We're chasing more growth. We're climbing this hockey stick curve upwards on the assumption that it all leads to better GDP. Increasingly, we now know that GDP can grow and grow and grow. It doesn't necessarily mean better welfare. So, sustainability. There's absolutely no doubt every single one of you can start to be active right now in reducing your footprint on this planet. And if you're not doing it, you will be left behind. The market is definitely changing in favor of people who do, but it has limitations. This is what I want to say today. What it does is it shrinks our footprint on the planet. It shrinks the impact of every single transaction. It does less harm. And in some cases, where we're putting money back into the community, as Tina suggested we have to do, it can do some good. But it's not enough. And the institutional leaders are talking about coping with success. That's not enough either. Coping isn't going to be enough. We've got to make that leap into a new system. And we can only do that when we take Einstein's warning to heart. We have to have a change of thought and a change of heart in how we see the world. Now, what's missing in these images? Very quickly, what's the immediate thing that you see missing in these images? People, yes. What else? Nature. There's nothing green in there, nothing that's alive, nothing that's breathing, taking in CO2 and giving you oxygen, is there? There's no light in those pictures. There's no life in those pictures. This is where the opportunity really lies. What's happening all around tourism is a fundamental shift in the way we see the world, not as a machine anymore that operates according to some kind of Newtonian physics, but in actual fact recognizing that we're all living on a living planet that is constantly regulating itself. It's alive, and you and I are alive, and you and I are part of it, and it is part of us. That is the biggest upside down, if you like, in the way we deal with each other and deal with the planet Earth. And all that has come about in the last 20, 30, 40 years as a result of the same science source. It was science that is telling us that this is how the world actually is as we know it today. It's not the world that Newton was talking about. We've come a long way. It's a living world. So we're going from what is an old industrial extractive model to becoming a new regenerative model, where we live in harmony with nature, we learn from nature, we start to work together collaboratively and intelligently. The reason I've put bees there is that bees actually are now seen as being one of the primary, most important species on the planet. We're busily killing them off. Their collective intelligence is amazing. Why can't we develop some collective intelligence too? Now, in case you think I'm getting too philosophical and you think maybe I'm being too negative, I don't think I am. Then I just want to bring it back down to ground. And I often feel that if you really want to see how whether a trend is alive or not, you look at what our agencies are talking about. So there are people like J. Walter Thompson who finally are sniffing out the fact that sustainability is definitely here to stay. It's not something fringe anymore. It's something that we have to get involved in. But it too is moving on. It's a 108-page report, and it's fortunately full of market intelligence. I thought Tina really did a wonderful job for me because I knew I wouldn't have time to go into all of the consumer numbers, but they're proving that this is the direction in which we go. Now, there's a reason that I've put "we" as a title of this slide, and that's because it's really you and me, all of us in this room, who are participants in this shift. Tina talked about self-care. All of us are worried about how we're going to stay sane in this crazy world. We're working harder than ever before just to keep our heads above water. We've got all the stuff we could ever want, but something is missing. And it's that dynamic that is really moving us forward. So what is it that we really need or want? And I would argue when you get right down to it now, especially for those of us in the Western world that are housed and fed and clothed and all the rest of it, we're just so overworked, so tired, so fed up. What we really want to do is to feel alive again, okay? We want to have some sense of energy and dynamism and hope and all the rest of it. It was Joseph Campbell who said, "Mate, it's not just meaning we're looking for, although there are many people who are definitely looking for meaning. We're just looking for the experience of being alive." And again, Tina pointed out this whole notion of how can people travel to be transformed. The Adventure Travel Association did a major survey recently of why people went on adventure travel trips. And it wasn't just to get the jollies of jumping off a bridge with a bungee cable hanging off your back end, as it were. It was because people wanted to feel that they were transformed. They had a memorable, deeply memorable experience. But then ask yourself, many of you in the room have children, have families, have loved ones. Yes? Did somebody? Okay, someone was raising a hand. What do you wish for them? Do you go to a dear friend of yours and say, "How's your relationship doing?" Would you expect them to say, "Oh, it's sustainable"? No, you don't wish for that relationship to be sustainable. You wish for that relationship to be full of joy and flourishing. I mean, that's what we wish for our children. Surely you wish for all of those things that are listed there. So, in this context, since it's not surprising that business is seriously looking, this is businesses around the world, this is the trend, are questioning Milton Friedman, who dominated my life, well, in the sense when I was growing up in business. I was told, "Anna, don't talk about this wishy-washy stuff. The purpose of business is to make money, and make money for shareholders, and that is it." Now, today, one of the most successful CEOs who took a stand on a number of issues and fought off some pretty nasty potential takeovers, Paul Polman, has said, as our sustainable brands, as our conscious capitalists, as our B Corps and all the rest of it, are all saying it's not good enough just to focus on making money for the shareholder. It's about making a contribution. It's about aligning who you are as a business and what you're doing with the needs of the community in which you're based. Now, this, to me, is probably one of the most important slides in the entire deck. And it just shows you that the speed with which we're changing. On the bottom line here, oh, that went black. Okay, I thought it was a pointer. On the bottom line, we have this change in business purpose from maximizing shareholder value, that's Milton Friedman in the 70s and 80s and 90s, to this notion of Michael Porter that we're delivering shared value to a larger number of stakeholders. But now, as Tina was intimating, that's not enough. We're now talking about generating a net positive impact on becoming a force for good and actually delivering real value back into the community on which you depend. And if there's one industry that depends on communities, surely it's tourism. We are utterly place-based. We bring people into our communities. And then the next movement beyond that is not just to do less harm or even do a little good. It's how do we leave this community infinitely better off than when we started? How do we work with the community? How do we develop capacity in the community for it to thrive? And the real world, and again, pointing up to the top left, we've moved from efficiency to effectiveness, this real word of caring. How do we demonstrate that we care? Not just for ourselves, but the company we work for. Not just for the company, but the community it's in. Not just the community, but the health of the planet. We won't do that, though, unless we have this shift in perception, unless we feel through every fiber of our being that what I do affects you and what you do affects me, and we're in this, on this spaceship Earth, if you like, together. Academics call it making it over an ontological threshold. That's why I'm not an academic. So where will this take us? It's going from exploiting nature to learning and applying her rules in order to leave the planet a better place than when we found it. I agree 1,000% with Tina that you have the most amazing opportunity in Norway to leapfrog. Most businesses right now in tourism are in the red or the green zones. A few are thinking about the yellow. Where I would go if I were you is I'd jump straight to the far end. And we as a country, we as communities are going to do everything we possibly can to ensure that our communities are better off because we exist. So there are 4 questions very quickly, or I should say, what does regeneration mean? I mean, the most beautiful thing about regeneration is about breathing life back into something. Those images of dead places, boxes and lines, no nature, no life, this is the complete opposite. It's breathing life back into people so that they want to do something with joy. It's breathing life into places. It's breathing life into businesses. But it involves answering 4 questions. What's it going to take to restore this relationship with the natural world? And as Tina said, you've got so much nature in Norway. It's your values. You have that with your social values. You are in probably the best position of anywhere in the world to take the lead in this regard. Once you see that we are part of nature and not apart from it, and once we start to ask the right questions, how do we generate the conditions for life to flourish, to thrive? The second question, how do we unleash the untapped potential that our psychologists and our neuroscientists are telling us exist within us? That we're not mean, selfish people that are confined to just, being so little. We are so much more than that. How do we see ourselves regenerating human nature and nurturing that? The interesting relationship with technology, this is Gerd Leonhard again, he's saying the problem with technology and algorithms is that they can't feel. Anything that can be digitized, any script, any process that can be done by robots, basically, include take your money when you buy something at the W.H. Smith store, can be done obviously by a robot and will be robotized. All of these features listed in this chart are human features. And if your business is developing those in your people, using those, expressing those aspects of what it means to be human with your customers, you're going to be way ahead of anyone else. This is where the value is. Yeah, and on the subject of value, I'm only saying all this because I believe that we're underperforming as an economic engine, if you like, because we haven't understood where the real value in tourism lies. We've transactionalized what could be a really deep emotional experience. It's what I call the encounter between the host and the guest. It's where we feel. Each encounter is unique. It has the potential to be magical, meaningful, and contain a hint of mystery, to be transformative and indelibly memorable. Each encounter can, if we design it right and we are entering it with our full selves, with both parties getting benefit from it, can enliven, it can enchant, it can enrich both parties. And when it does, I would suggest the value that's generated is actually priceless, but it will certainly be a lot more than a transaction aided and abetted by a machine. Now, I said the benefits have to be mutual. They have to be experienced by the guest and the host, enabling individuals and destinations to thrive and be healthy in every way. So let's reframe the idea of a destination. Sorry, I think I lost something there. Let's start asking the question, how can we help the individuals in the destination, whether they're residents, whether they're employees? How do we help each individual thrive and become more than they thought was possible? How do we help those enterprises become thriving, prosperous enterprises? And so in total, how do we make that community also thrive? So I'm saying we reframe the concept of a destination not as a conveyor belt, which is in many cases what it is at the moment, not an assembly line, but as a living system that indeed seeks to flourish. I'm working right now with this lovely lady called Michelle Holliday, who's really looked at how we apply living systems to businesses and communities and so on. And when you start to think that way, your language changes. You start talking about cultivating rather than extracting or using. But basically, I would suggest that we are very much like a tree. And God knows, you're hearing enough programs about our complete dependence on trees' ability to capture carbon and to convert it into oxygen. But for us in business, what are we? What is our source of energy? Our source of energy, of course, is the visitor. The tree grows upwards in order to attract sunlight, and it converts it into carbon and oxygen. It requires an infrastructure, there's no doubt about that, but it also requires its roots going deep in the soil to extract minerals that keep it healthy. And that is our community. So to think about doing tourism without doing it in community is crazy. Once you start thinking of a destination maybe as a forest and learning what we're learning from science about how all of these trees are in constant communication with each other, then you start to get inspired and maybe realizing, if trees can do it, why can't we do it? We're supposed to be more intelligent, although that is subject to some doubt. So maybe destinations are like forests. Destinations are living communities. This, for example, is a map, a topology for those of you interested in technology, which is a map of a network system. It could be a map of a destination with all the different species in it, the attractions, the accommodations, the transportation networks, etc. This is a map of how individual trees in a 30 square meter area of forest exchange nutrients and water and resources among them. Could that not be how we work? But in many respects it isn't. We're still hoarding information. We're still living in our silos. This part of the business doesn't talk to that part of the business. This part of the industry doesn't talk to that part of the industry. We're fiercely competitive. We're not collaborative. That's not how nature works. So the questions I'm suggesting we start asking are, what does a successful living system in nature look like? Why look at nature Well, she's been doing it for 3.8 billion years. And there's now a fantastic science called biomimicry, for example, where we're learning exactly what makes a living system successful. Look at these features. Obviously, it's alive, but it's self-organizing. It doesn't need a boss to tell them what to do. It just does it. It creates the conditions for other life to exist. It's adaptable. We definitely need to be adaptable, constantly learning. If there's a shock, it bounces back. It's resilient. But most of all, it creates the most amazing abundance. Any of those of you who have an orchard, for example, know how abundant nature can be. So it's very different to the kind of systems that we have at the moment. It's efficient. There's no waste in a living forest. There's one heck of a lot of waste in a tourism destination at the moment. How can we learn to copy what nature does? More importantly, it's evolving. It's constantly growing and developing. It doesn't stay the same. It doesn't settle for less. It's constantly creating more. People grow up. Each place is unique. Each place is in balance, and each part contributes to the whole. That's called flourishing. And that's what we're doing right now in Flanders. I'm just 1 minute over, I think, or 1 minute left. I'm not sure what that means, but essentially what we're doing with the Flanders, who've taken to this idea of shifting off having growth, more visitors as their primary objective, to how do we generate real, manageable, measurable net benefit into the community, and looking at that community as being made up of a true, diverse community of different people, different parts, different elements. How do we look at every part of that now flourishing? Frankly, it's new work, it's early work, we're in early stages, and it's a completely new way of thinking about tourism. But right now, there's nothing else out there that's completely different, so I lay this in front of you and ask for any level of interest you want to share with me would be much appreciated. So forgive the fact that it's not worked all out. It can't be. I believe if you look at nature, everything is done through collective, collaborative action. Bees are smart, not as an individual, but as a hive. We could be a new beehive in tourism. I thank you for your patience and hope I haven't overtaken my time. Thank you.